Blueface did not just have a messy night. Blueface turned what should have been a celebration into the kind of public chaos that keeps getting darker every single time these names start trending. And the reason people are so locked in right now is because this wasn't one isolated argument, one sloppy livestream, or one random rumor that came out of nowhere. According to the clips and details circulating online, Blueface was tied to baby shower drama, a street fight, claims of a shooting, and a fresh wave of questions about why every situation around Blueface and Chrisean Rock seems to escalate past the point of basic dysfunction. That is why this story is hitting differently. A lot of people are not just reacting to one fight. They are reacting to a pattern. They are reacting to the feeling that whenever Blueface and Chrisean Rock end up in the same orbit, normal conflict does not stay normal for very long. It always turns into spectacle. It always turns into humiliation. It always turns into another viral clip where everybody watching can see the disaster coming before the people inside the disaster decide to stop it. And what makes this even more explosive is the setting. This wasn't just some random link-up in the middle of the night with no emotional stakes attached. This was all unfolding around a baby shower connected to Blueface's pregnant child's mother, Nevaeh. That detail matters because it changes the emotional temperature immediately. A baby shower is supposed to be one of those moments where, at least for a few hours, people put the ego aside, keep the drama contained, and let the attention stay on the mother and the child. But that is not the energy people say followed Blueface into this situation. Instead, the night spiraled into the exact kind of circus that critics have been warning about for years. Here is where people say the tension really started to boil. Before the street chaos, there were already scenes circulating that looked like they were designed to provoke a reaction. The story being passed around online is that Blueface and Chrisean Rock were in the middle of more baby shower-related friction, with clips showing confrontation, suspicion, and that same toxic push-pull that has become attached to Blueface's public brand. By the time the night moved into the street, the energy was already contaminated. People were not walking into a peaceful evening. They were walking into a powder keg that had been lit way earlier. Then came the street altercation that pushed the whole story into a completely different category. Based on the footage and the account you provided, Chrisean Rock allegedly got into a gang-related fight connected to Blueface that escalated fast. There are claims that Blueface may have been knocked out, claims that somebody's head was slammed against a car, and claims that gunfire followed the broader confrontation. Some of those details are still circulating as allegations tied to clips and social media accounts, so they need to be treated carefully. But even without every piece being independently confirmed, the public reaction tells you everything about the perception problem here. People no longer hear Blueface drama and assume exaggeration. People hear Blueface drama and assume the worst is still loading. That is a brutal place to be in when your name is already surrounded by controversy. Because once the audience starts expecting disaster from you, every new incident gets processed through that lens. And Blueface has spent so long turning chaos into content that the line between performance and real-life fallout looks almost invisible now. There is a reason so many viewers keep saying this whole ecosystem around him feels like reality television with no safety rails. There is always another argument. There is always another humiliation ritual. There is always another camera. There is always another scene where somebody looks degraded, embarrassed, endangered, or all three at once. One of the most disturbing parts of the public conversation is the suggestion that some of these setups seem almost engineered for virality first and human consequences second. When people watched the baby shower-related footage, a lot of them were not asking whether it looked classy or respectable. They were asking whether it looked staged, baited, or deliberately combustible. That suspicion matters because if the audience begins to believe the conflict is being cultivated for clicks, then every participant starts to look less like a victim of random chaos and more like somebody playing chicken with a catastrophe that could easily turn real. And according to the source material you provided, that is exactly what happened. The scripted feeling friction may have been one thing, but the actual fight, the alleged knockout, and the reports of a shooting pushed the night beyond that manufactured content lane. That is when the story stopped looking like ordinary internet mess and started looking like the kind of spiral that can end in police reports, lawsuits, criminal exposure, or something even worse. Once physical injury enters the frame, once weapons are part of the conversation, Once people start talking about gangs and retaliation, the entire situation changes. Chrisean Rock is at the center of that shift because public opinion around Chrisean Rock has become deeply divided. There are still people who see Chrisean Rock as somebody constantly pulled back into Blueface tornado. There are others who believe Chrisean Rock actively runs toward the fire, thrives inside the volatility, and turns every personal crisis into a loyalty test, a performance, or a war. In the clips and explanations floating around, Chrisean Rock reportedly framed part of the confrontation as self-defense, saying multiple people approached while Blueface was occupied and that she warned them she did not want trouble. But the problem for Chrisean Rock is that self-defense arguments get very shaky in the public imagination when the video fragments already make the entire environment look aggressive, unstable, and primed for violence. And this is where Blueface becomes impossible to separate from the story. Because even if Chrisean Rock says she was reacting to what came toward her, people still look at Blueface and ask the bigger question: why does this keep happening around Blueface in the first place? Why does every major development around Blueface seem to involve a woman being publicly disrespected, emotionally destabilized, baited into competition, or dragged into another humiliating showdown? Why does Blueface keep finding himself at the center of these triangles and collisions where everybody loses dignity and nobody seems safe? Those are the questions driving the outrage more than any single punch. What also made people furious is the symbolism of the night itself. If the reporting and clips are accurate, this was not just a messy outing. This was a baby shower weekend attached to Nevaeh, who is pregnant with Blueface's child, and it still became another arena for conflict. That is why so many people online have been saying the disrespect feels layered. It is not only about infidelity rumors or relationship chaos anymore. It is about the message that no occasion is sacred. Not pregnancy, not a family milestone, not basic decency, not even the idea that a mother carrying your child should get one day without her celebration being pulled into a public circus. And once that perception hardens, Blueface starts to look less like a reckless man making reckless choices and more like the architect of an entire dysfunctional environment. That is the phrase that keeps surfacing in different forms: architect of chaos. Because whether Blueface explicitly tells people to fight or not, whether Blueface physically starts every confrontation or not, the atmosphere around Blueface has become so toxic that people now read him as the common denominator. He is the constant in the equation. Different women, different live streams, different settings, same combustion. Meanwhile, the claims that Blueface may have been knocked out only added another layer of humiliation to the public response. If true, it turns the whole "I'm in control" image into something shakier. Because Blueface's brand has long depended on projecting dominance, danger, and command over the madness around him. But when a night ends with reports that Blueface got put down while everything around him collapses, the image changes. Suddenly, the man who built a spectacle out of other people's instability starts to look trapped inside his own machine. And the internet is ruthless when it senses that kind of reversal. Then there is the alleged shooting element, which is the part that moves this from viral tea into something much more serious. Anytime people are talking about shots fired, gang ties, retaliation, or bodies moving in panic, the conversation stops being entertaining. It becomes a public safety story. It becomes a legal story. It becomes a story about how quickly clout-chasing energy can mutate into irreversible consequences. Even if some details are still developing, the very fact that these claims are attached to Blueface and Chrisean Rock tells you why the backlash is so intense. People feel like this is no longer edgy. It is reckless. It is not dramatic in a fun or memeable way. It is dramatic in a way that makes viewers say somebody is eventually going to end up destroyed. The footage around the earlier baby shower tension also fed into that concern because it reinforced the idea that this entire world operates on intimidation, humiliation, and emotional volatility. The screaming, the accusations, the suspicion, the threats, the constant sense that everybody is performing strength while actually sitting on top of insecurity and resentment. That emotional recipe is dangerous enough in private. In public, with cameras, entourages, pride, rivalries, and the pressure to avoid looking weak, it becomes a disaster engine. And what keeps making the Chrisean Rock side of this story so complicated is that Chrisean Rock often speaks in a way that blends vulnerability, spirituality, toughness, and contradiction all at once. 1 minute Chrisean Rock can sound wounded and exhausted. The next minute Chrisean Rock sounds ready to fade anybody in sight. 1 minute there is language about growth, faith, and understanding sin. The next minute there is another eruption, another clash, another explanation for why the violence was unavoidable. That contradiction is part of why the audience stays so polarized. Some people hear pain. Other people hear manipulation. Some hear survival. Others hear escalation dressed up as self-justification. Still, even the people who criticize Chrisean Rock the hardest often circle back to Blueface. That matters, because it suggests the public sees Blueface not just as another participant, but as a force multiplier. He makes everything worse. He turns insecurity into competition. He turns jealousy into content. He turns private pain into monetized spectacle. And whether he does that with intention, instinct, or sheer emotional irresponsibility almost stops mattering after a while. The outcome is the same. More damage, more clips, more public embarrassment, more people debating how low the next chapter will go. The other detail hanging over this entire story is the growing sense that consequences may finally be catching up. If there really is footage of physical assault, if there are witnesses, if there are injuries, and if law enforcement starts tracing the aftermath of any alleged shooting or gang-linked escalation, then this situation could move beyond social media judgment into institutional consequences. Civil claims become possible. Criminal scrutiny becomes possible. Narrative control disappears once outside systems step in. And that is why the tone online feels different right now. People are not just gossiping. A lot of them are sounding the alarm. They are also asking a harder question that nobody in this circle seems eager to answer. What happens to the people around the chaos who did not ask to be turned into side characters in somebody else's dysfunction? What happens to the pregnant mother whose celebration gets overshadowed? What happens to the child who will eventually grow up and see these clips? What happens to the random person in the street who turns into a headline because they crossed paths with the wrong entourage at the wrong moment? What happens when the collateral damage starts mattering more than the personalities that generated it? That is why the audience reaction to Nevaeh has been so complicated too. Some viewers feel sorry for her because no pregnant woman deserves to have a baby shower weekend drenched in this kind of mess. Other viewers say the warning signs were already there, and that being tied to Blueface means chaos is not a surprise anymore. But even those harsher takes do not erase the optics. The optics are terrible. If your name is Blueface and the mother of your child is trying to celebrate a pregnancy while your night somehow bends back toward Chrisean Rock, street conflict, and public disgrace, then the image you project is not one of leadership or maturity. It is one of corrosion. And that may be the real reason this story has people locked in. It confirms what many already believed. Blueface and Chrisean Rock together create a gravity field that pulls everybody nearby into instability. Not because every rumor is true, not because every clip tells the whole story, but because the pattern is now impossible to ignore. The names change around them. The locations change around them. The specifics change around them. The ending never really changes. Somebody gets humiliated. Somebody gets hurt. Somebody has to explain what happened. And the internet gets another episode in a saga that stopped looking entertaining a long time ago. Even the way this entire situation is discussed online reflects that fatigue. You do not just see shock anymore. You see resignation. You see people saying, of course this happened. Of course a baby shower turned into a mess. Of course Blueface was in the middle of it. Of course Chrisean Rock was attached to another violent scene. Of course the details sound unbelievable and familiar at the exact same time. That is not normal celebrity gossip fatigue. That is what happens when public drama becomes so repetitive that the audience starts viewing real human risk as part of a recurring content format. And that is dangerous for everybody involved, because repetition can make people numb right up until the moment something irreversible happens. The internet will laugh, meme, repost, and speculate for months while a pattern looks survivable. But if one night goes too far, all the old clips get replayed in a different light. Then the narrative becomes, everybody saw the warning signs, and nobody stopped the machine. That is the shadow hanging over Blueface right now. Not just embarrassment. Not just bad optics. Escalation. Real escalation. So when people ask why this story is exploding, That is the answer. It is not simply because Blueface and Chrisean Rock trended again. It is because this episode seems to combine every criticism their names already attract into one ugly cluster. Relationship disrespect, public humiliation, possible scripted chaos, alleged gang energy, physical violence, and the suggestion that gunfire entered the picture before the night was over. That is not one controversy. That is a collapse. And if you step back, the biggest issue may be that nobody in this cycle seems capable of choosing de-escalation before the public damage is done. Not Blueface, not the surrounding circle, not the internet audience that sometimes rewards the worst behavior with the loudest attention. By the time reflection arrives, the clips are already viral, the sides are already chosen, the injuries are already discussed, and the next explanation video is already being recorded. Which brings everything back to the central question. What exactly is the endgame here? Because if Blueface keeps building his public identity around chaos, if Chrisean Rock keeps getting pulled into scenes that flirt with catastrophe, and if every major life event around them keeps turning into another battlefield, then eventually the story is not going to be about who won the argument, who got exposed, or who embarrassed who online. Eventually the story is going to be about who could have walked away and didn't. That is why this latest chapter feels less like entertainment and more like a warning flare. A baby shower should not end in talk of knockouts, head slamming, gang ties, and gunfire. A relationship triangle should not keep generating this level of instability. A celebrity storyline should not make people feel like they are watching an accident happen in slow motion. But that is exactly what this has started to resemble. And unless something changes fast, the next update could be even darker than this one. So now the pressure shifts to what comes next. Does Blueface speak and try to spin this into another content cycle? Does Chrisean Rock double down on self-defense and survival? Does Nevaeh publicly distance herself from all of it? Or does this become another chapter where everybody absorbs the humiliation and keeps orbiting the same chaos? Those are the questions pushing comment sections into overdrive, because the public has seen enough to know one thing for sure. Silence never lasts long in this world, and the next response usually makes the story even bigger. And the darkest part of all this is that the internet is no longer waiting to see whether this world is unhealthy. Most people already decided that. What they are waiting to see now is whether Blueface and Chrisean Rock are willing to stop before the consequences become permanent. Because at this point, nobody can honestly say the warning signs were hidden. The warning signs are the brand. The warning signs are the content. The warning signs are the storyline. And if this night really unfolded the way the circulating clips and allegations suggest, then this was not just another messy chapter. This was a loud, ugly reminder that chaos does not stay profitable forever. So tell me this. At what point does the audience stop calling this drama and start calling it danger? At what point does Blueface lose the ability to package collapse as entertainment? At what point does Chrisean Rock stop being seen as a chaotic co-star and start being judged through a legal, moral, and public safety lens that is much harder to outrun? And maybe the biggest question of all, if a baby shower can turn into this, what exactly is left that this chaos will not touch? Because that is where this story really lands. Not in the meme, not in the punchline, not in the clip. It lands in the realization that every new episode feels more reckless than the last one. And every reckless episode raises the odds that the next headline will be the one nobody can spin, monetize, or walk back. That is why people are talking. That is why people are furious. And that is why this story is bigger than one fight in the street. It looks like a system failing in public, one viral breakdown at a time. If more footage surfaces, if Blueface finally addresses the knockout claims, if Chrisean Rock gives a fuller version of the fight, or if the alleged shooting details become clearer, this story could change fast. But right now, based on the material already circulating, the damage to the public image is already done. Blueface looks reckless. Chrisean Rock looks volatile. The situation around Nevaeh looks humiliating. And the entire night looks like proof that the chaos everybody kept calling content may have finally crossed into something much more serious. So drop your honest take. Was this another staged disaster that spun out of control? Was Chrisean Rock defending herself in a situation that became bigger than expected? Is Blueface the real engine behind all of this collapse? Or has this entire circle reached the point where no explanation can make the pattern look normal anymore? Because one thing is absolutely clear. This was supposed to be a celebration, and instead it turned into one more public scene that leaves people asking how much worse this can still get.